to pass data between segues using Xcode 8.2.1 using Swift 3. So the first thing you're going to want to do is create a new Xcode project. And then after it loads up, select single view application, click next. We'll call this passing data with segues. Choose your team, organization name, bundle identifier. For this tutorial, it doesn't necessarily matter, but in your production application, it will. Click next. Choose where you want to save the project, and click create. I save all my stuff to my documents folder, which makes everything pretty easy. So let's see, the first thing I'm going to want to do is come over here to my main storyboard, and on my main storyboard, let it load. On my main storyboard, I'm going to have one single view controller. So for this tutorial, let me hide my sidebars. So for this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to basically pass data from one view controller to another view controller through a segue. So you can see what I did there. I added a new view controller to my my main storyboard, and I created a relationship between the two segues using a push segue. I'll show you how I did that. So let me delete this. So what I did is I came over here to the sidebar. What the fuck is this thing called? Anyway, so I came over here to my UI elements in my sidebar, and I looked for my view controller, and I dragged a new view controller over to the screen. I went to the first segue, or the first view controller, control dragged over to the new view controller, and created a show manual segue. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is name this segue. I keep my segue names pretty generic, so we'll just call this one push. I'm going to keep it copied to my clipboard because we're going to need it later. The second thing we're going to need to do is make a new view controller class for this second view controller that we have. So we'll go File, New, File, or you can do Command click on Cocoa Touch class, next, and we're going to subclass UI view controller, and we will call it second view controller. Whatever, it doesn't matter what the name is. This is just for learning purposes. Click on create, and then you'll see we have our second view controller. So I'm going to click this little back button right here to go back to our main storyboard. Let's align this, and I'm going to give that new second view controller class to this second view controller. Okay, let's put this a little closer so we can see. So what we have to do is remember that this is the second view controller using the second view controller class, and this is our push segue. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is create a way to trigger the segue. So I'm going to put a button on the screen, put it right there at the bottom, and I'm going to add some constraints. Let's do bottom 20 pixels or 20 points to the nearest neighbor, and then I will do horizontally, actually no, not horizontally, I'm going to do 20 from the bottom, 20 from the left, 20 from the right, and then we'll make a nice big thick button for us to press. The second thing we're going to need is, for this tutorial, we're going to pass some basic text. So let's add in a text box where we can prompt a user to type some text, which we can then pass on to the next segue. So I will do, for my constraints, I'll do 20 from the left, 20 from the right, and then for this one, let's just do vertically center it in container. Okay, so that's all set up. Let's add a placeholder for that, and we'll call it enter some segue text, whatever, something stupid like that, center. Okay, and then on this second view controller, we're going to have a way to display the text. Since we're using text, I'm going to add a label. And let's do this. Let's actually just create some constraints and do 20 from the top, 20 from the left, 20 from the right, and 20 from the bottom. And unselect or deselect constrain to margins. Add 4 constraints. Update frames, and then we'll center it to make it look nice and whatever. So the next thing we're going to need to do is, since we're dealing with storyboards and we're dealing with segues, it's generally good practice to use a navigation view controller. So in order to set that up, you're going to want to just come over here to our first segue and go editor, embed in navigation controller. So now, every time a navigation or a segue goes off, you're going to have this nice title bar, which you can use to your advantage. You know, put a title in it, whatever. And so you'll have that little back button that you see on most of the applications that you use, specifically native Apple applications. So now let's get to some code. Let's open up our assistant editor. And the first thing we're going to want to do is use our first view controller, which is this view controller right here. You can see that it's using this view controller class. And we're going to create interface builder outlets for our text input. We'll call it text input. And then we're going to want to create an outlet for our button as an action. So we will do outlet action because it's a button and we want a method to call, and we will call it button action connect. So you'll see we have this interface builder outlet using a weak variable for text input, and then we have our interface builder action for this button action, so basically any action for this button. So let's just add some simple logging, doing button action, and then just to make this button more friendly, let's tell it to do something, and we will label it as show segue. Okay, so in Swift, when you want to segue between one view controller and another, you use the perform segue with identifier method. So what we're going to do over here in our first view controller is when you click on the button action, we're going to do self dot perform segue with identifier. It's under self. You actually don't need this self, but I usually use it when I'm doing segues or more global related things. So we're going to perform the segue, and the identifier that we used was push. If you remember from a few minutes ago, the way that you can find out what you named yours is just by clicking on this little arrow between these two segues and looking at the identifier label right here, and we're going to perform that segue. So let's just test this out to see if it works, to see if it even runs. Let's do Command R, build it, give it a minute. Okay, build succeeded. Let's open up this simulator. Let the app load. My computer is a little slow just because I'm on my portable laptop. I'll probably cut this section out, but let's see. Okay, so once that loaded, we can see our app in our test application here. We have our input text field that doesn't do anything yet, and we have our show segue button. So let's just see if it works. Click on show segue, and it segues to our second view controller. And so you can see up here that we have our navigation controller to allow us to switch between parent and children view controllers very easily. And the way that we were able to do that was by adding a navigation controller. So the next thing we're going to want to do is allow the user to type inside this text field or this text input and have it show on this label right here. So, excuse me. So the way that we do that is by passing the text from this input box onto this view controller as a whole, as a global variable, and then applying that global variable to this label once the view has loaded. So let me show you how we do that. So we come over here to our second view controller. Let's get rid of some of this commented out stuff that we don't really need. And the first thing we're going to want to do is create an interface builder outlet for label. Let's call this LBL. And then we're going to want to create a variable which we can use to store data in before our segue fires off. So we'll call this variable passed label text. It'll be a string, and it will have a default value of empty. So once view did load, we will apply this label text value to our interface builder of LBL. So we would do LBL.text equals passed label text. I spelled that weird. So let's copy this variable because we're going to need it. Oops, what happened? No. So let's copy this variable name because we're going to need it. We're going to need it because we're going to reference this second view controller and this passed label text from this segue text. So come back over here to our view controller, and on our button action we will do a conditional check to make sure that the user has entered some text inside this text field. So we will do if txtinput dot text dot characters dot count is greater than 0. And we're going to go ahead and do the segue. Otherwise, print error, no text, something like that, something simple and easy. You can do alert messages or whatever you want in your application, but simply for this, we're going to do this conditional check for simplicity. So if we have characters in this text box, which means a user has entered text, what we're going to do is store that text or keep that text in a local variable. So up here we'll make a variable and we'll call it text to pass string. Well, text to pass string. And what we'll do is we will use this variable to store the text input.text, and before this perform segue is pushed, we're going to apply the value of this text to pass to this second view controller under this passed label text. It's pretty simple to do. So in Swift, there's a function or a method called prepare for segue. And what happens is prepare for segue gets called anytime the view controller is about to do a segue. Whether your segue is set up manually, like we have done here, or it's set up automatically in your code, this will get called. So we can use this to our benefit and apply and set properties of the destination view controller by using prepare for segue. So the way that we use prepare for segue is we first set a conditional statement, which will be if segue dot identifier is push so if our segue.identifier is equal to push, which is in this case the one that we're doing, then we'll set the destination view controller equal to segue.destination view controller as second view controller. So essentially what we're doing is first we're checking the identifier to make sure that it matches our push. Let me fix my optionals here. So what we're doing is we're checking our segue, and if our segue is this push segue, which is what we're doing down here, then we will target the destination, segue.destination, which is where this segue is going to, the destination. And then what we can do is we can access this second view controller, and then we can store variable data inside any of the properties on this in this view controller. So there's two ways we can do this. One is we can do destination view controller dot lbl dot text equals text to pass, which will set the data and then perform the segue and then show the segue. But the issue with that is if you're using data that's more complex, like a JSON object that doesn't need to be shown on the screen and it just kind of needs to be stored inside of a variable, or you're passing a cached image object, or something that needs to be stored as a global variable inside that class and doesn't need to be applied directly to the screen, you would actually just pass it as a variable. So the way that you do that is you do destination view controller dot data pass the fuck did you call that? Destination view controller dot passed label text equals text to pass. Then what would happen is once we call this perform segue with identifier, it will prepare itself for the new segue to be passed. If the segue that we're passing is the push segue, we will pull out the destination view controller, which we know is the second view controller. On the second view controller, we are storing a global variable, which is passed label text, and then we are setting the value of that in this prepare for Segue. So if we go ahead and run this, Command R, let's see, we can see that the text that we place inside the text box will appear on the destination view controller. So let's see, enter some text. Well, let's enter some text and click on show segue. Let's see, that didn't work. So let's go back. And let's figure out why this didn't work. Okay, the reason it didn't work is because we're never setting this text to pass. So first we need to set this data text to pass equals text input dot text. And then what it'll do is it'll grab that text out of this input box and then show it on this second view controller, theoretically. So let's run it and let's see what happens. Give it a minute, it's a little slow. So let's enter some text. Hello, test segue. And click on show segue. And now you can see that our label has inherited the text that we entered in this segue. And it'll happen time and time again based upon whatever you enter inside that box. So just as an overview, the most important methods that you're going to want to know are prepare for segue and perform segue with identifier. You aren't limited to simple string text passing via segue. You can also pass complex objects. You can pass entire view controllers. You can essentially pass anything you want. For example, if this was a UIImage, I can pass a UIImage through there, and then I can use the UIImage on the second view controller. You can pass anything you want. And so that's the value and that's the beauty of passing data between segues. So I hope this helps anybody out there who's looking to sort of just figure out how to pass data between segues. I'm going to be making YouTube videos, and I'm going to go through all the different trials and errors and problems that I had when I was starting out and learning how to do Swift, and I'm going to make some tutorials and hopefully help create value for people who are going through similar problems. So please, if you have any questions or comments or any suggestions or any type of tutorial you think you want to see, just feel free to leave a comment. If you fucking hated the video, feel free to leave a comment. Regardless, I just I want to create and help create value in people's lives. So thanks for watching.